fooled me once. Shame on you. It fooled me. We can't get fooled again.
All right, welcome everyone to this week's episode of Reframing the Narrative, episode 33. Some of you might know what I mean, but we are so thrilled this week to have our special guest, Clint Griess, who is a partner in arms, also located in California, where Jake and I met originally, and he's been doing a lot of great work with the Fluoride Action Network and just really pushing back against the fluoride agenda in municipality water. Clint, it's been great getting you on the show, and just wanted to let you introduce yourself a little bit and tell our audience about kind of what you've been up to and what's been happening in that world.
Well, yeah, thanks for talking about fluoride. The fluoridated water is a topic we have to talk about. It's one of those things that is just always there. It's in the background. People don't think about it much. So any conversation about it is a win. Got to raise the consciousness and be able to talk about it. Even within the mix of all the headlines and the constant barrage of things that we're supposed to be talking about, because there's a lot of injustice in the world, there's a lot of things to put attention on. But we drink water every single day, and it's so ubiquitous. And fluoridation chemicals are odorless and tasteless, so you wouldn't know they were there unless someone told you that they're there. And yeah, I'm telling you, for 200 million Americans, it's there. But we have had some wins lately, and maybe we can talk about that right up front, because I love celebrating wins. In this decades-long fight, it's been an uphill slog, and every time we turn around, we think we've got the silver bullet that's going to end fluoridation everywhere once and for all. It doesn't work out that way, which only proves once again how entrenched the fluoridationists are and how capable they are of manipulating people's minds about the addition of a neurotoxin to our tap water voluntarily. It's madness. So I'm glad we're talking about it at all.
Well, maybe we can backtrack a little bit before we talk about the victories. Maybe just give an overview of what fluoride does to, you mentioned it's a neurotoxin, what it does to the human body and the damage it does, and why we need to get it out of the water. That's a good start, right?
Yes. When speaking about fluoridation of the tap water, you have to recognize that it is a public health policy issue. It is politics. And it began in politics, and it must end with politics, one way or another. But indeed, fluoridation chemicals were first introduced into our water and continue to be in there based on the premise that it improves dental health, specifically reduces cavities. And if fluoride activists, fluoridationists, the people who are putting this stuff in our water and advocating for it all these years, if they use the same standard of science that they require from us to prove that it's harmful, to prove that it's effective, there wouldn't be any science that would hold muster. So, you've heard the mantra before, safe and effective. And we can talk about the lack of safety and the lack of efficacy. It doesn't work. And it hurts every part of our body that it touches. The fluorine ion is unique, and it is kind of the protected chemical. When you hear fluoride, you should think like the way you think about arsenic or lead. And no one would be thinking, oh, let's just add a little bit to the water. Concentration is everything, and so we'll just put the optimal amount of lead in your water to, say, fix your eyes or your toenails or something. Or arsenic. And so fluorine has been really, the term even has been spruced up. People think it's a good thing, but it's not. So in the 40s is when the first introduction of fluoridation chemicals into the tap water began. And it was an experiment, actually, that was intended to last 10 years. 2 cities, one in Michigan and one in New York, I believe. It's comparable cities. One they added fluoride and one they didn't, and they were going to spend 10 years observing people's dental health and then make a determination. But they abbreviated that after a couple of years, they decided, oh, we see, oh, it's safe and effective. Let's just roll it out across the country. And so what we see is a collusion between federal government, media, academia, and professional organizations, as well as corporations, to foist this really dangerous, reckless public policy onto Americans. And you might have seen some of those goofy reels, better living through chemistry and, fluoridation, it's good for you, because there was some major advertising and major propaganda that was rolled out across America to try to saturate the fluoridation schemes throughout the country, and they were really pushing them hard. And so cities and counties and states all over were adopting it, and sometimes it was the city councils, like in the case of that first town, Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was just their city council of 6 people plus the mayor 7 voting to put fluoridation chemicals in the water for everybody. So it might, or sometimes it's put on the ballot and voted in by a majority of people, or legislatures, like California State of California since 1995 has had a statute on the books that requires all towns with 10,000 hookups or more to fluoridate their water. And so anyway, it over many, many years, they pushed it. Great for your teeth, great for your teeth. The American Dental Association got behind it. And now, although somewhere around the 70s and 80s, the adoption started to decrease. The rate of adoption started to decrease because they were basically getting as many people on board as we're going to get on board. And then their strategy, fluoridationists, their strategy turned to just being quiet about it. So that's why you don't hear. They basically maxed out how much fluoridation they could possibly do in America, and then they just hope that people won't talk about it, and it'll just be there. And it's been there my whole life. I've lived in rural areas where I was raised on well water in the country, so I wasn't fluoridated when I was growing up. But I moved to the city in 1983. And had drank fluoridated water for years until I figured it out, learned about it, and sought ways to avoid it, principally just by buying bottled water, unfortunately in plastic, and dragging it up 3 flights to my kitchen and using it. Now I have reverse osmosis, under sink filtration, and for a lot of situations, that's typically the best way to go. It's relatively affordable, and it's effective, very effective. It reduces the fluorine to zero. It takes out everything. In fact, fluorine is extremely small, and so that's why it requires this extra powerful filtration just to remove it. So, we've been fighting. When I say collectively, I joined the fight in 2011 when I dedicated myself to ending fluoridation. Not really knowing what it was going to take, but that I would really, if it took my whole lifetime, I was going to make sure that fluoridation chemicals were no longer in tap water anywhere in the world. It just so happens that, the tap water in America, we have half of all the fluoridated people in the world are American, about 200 million people. And then there's another 200 million people around the world. Australia is a big place, New Zealand, Ireland, the entire country of Ireland is fluoridated. But when it comes to Europe, it's really the outliers. Continental Europe doesn't have any fluoridation. Neither does Africa or Asia, except for Singapore. The major cities in Brazil are fluoridating. Anyway, you can count up another 200 million people around the world. But compared to 8 billion, that's just a fraction of the people who are doing this. So it's an unusual public health policy in the world. And it's also been demonstrated that it doesn't work. We have a wonderful graph that you can easily find online if you just Google dental health over the decades, and it shows all of the developed countries in the world and the incidence of dental caries, and it's just drops precipitously since dental hygiene improved around the world and in the last decades, and the slope of decline is the exact same slope of decline in fluoridated countries and non-fluoridated countries. That should be enough. But anyway, we are the long-term test subjects, and it's really sad. I can tell you, all the arguments for and against, the justifications for it. But I can tell you my study now of fluoridation policy has led me to see the world in such a way that if all you ever do is understand the history and science of fluoridation of the tap water, it'll teach you everything you need to know about the tyranny and the collusion of the institutions that we're supposed to trust, how they operate in collusion to really harm our health. The medical system is obviously benefiting because there are endless ailments that are either directly caused by fluoride consumption over a period of time, or it surely exacerbates many other conditions as well. Everything from hip fractures to slow thyroid, lower IQ is the big issue that we addressed when we sued the EPA and won in a federal court just last year. The fluorine chemicals, once ingested, go throughout your entire body. The fluorine ion is the 9th smallest ion in the universe. It's really small, but it's also the most electronegative, which means that it'll grab a hold of anything at the molecular level. You'll never find the fluorine ion by itself in nature, never anywhere, because it will grab hold of whatever's around it and bond with it. So when you put it in your body, in the form of the chemical that's typically used nowadays, which is called hydrofluorosilicic acid. This is a byproduct from the phosphate mining industry. It comes directly from the wet scrubbers in the smokestacks of these processing, where they remove the phosphate from the ore, and then there's this residual fluorine that gets trapped in the form of this acid. It's not natural, like a lot of the proponents will try to tell you. It's highly, basically that's one of the first reasons when people say, well, why? That's one of the first things you can point to. There's major profits that comes from the phosphate mining industry, because they don't have to now deal with that waste product in terms of trying to neutralize it. As I said, it's highly electronegative and it will react. And so it's really super toxic, and it would cost a lot to neutralize it. But instead, they turned it into a product. And even if they sold it for $1, it is relatively inexpensive because they're just trying to get rid of it. So really, fluoridation is just one of those get rid of pollution. The solution to pollution is dilution, and that's really all it is. And even though they don't make a lot of money, relatively speaking, off of the sale of fluoridation chemicals, they save billions by not having to deal with it, neutralize it. So we're just living in a upside down world once again, and the fluoridation continues. But we did have a couple of victories recently that are very noteworthy. First, it was the state of Utah. Governor signed a legislation in May that went into effect, in March, that went into effect in May to prohibit fluoridation chemicals throughout the entire state. That was 1.8 million people got saved from the exposure to fluoridation. And then Florida followed. The state of Florida followed I don't know if you know their head health aid leader there. They call him it's not the Department of Health. He's the Surgeon General of Florida, and his name's Latipo, and he's been a vocal advocate for ending fluoridation for a while. And he was also big the vaccines too, against the vaccines. I don't know if you know, he recommends Floridians don't take the COVID mRNA vaccine. Anyway, he and others, the legislature signed by Governor DeSantis, made it illegal to fluoridate the waters of Florida. That's almost 19 million people saved from fluoridation there. So that's the biggest movement we've seen in decades, and it's really, really good news. Another noteworthy personage, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., became slightly famous a week before the election just at the end of October or early November, he tweeted that fluoridation would end in America on day one of a Trump administration. Another promise that has not come true, but he did force the conversation into the public domain, and anytime that happens, we're usually glad of it. I mean, the pro-fluoridationists have a serious propaganda machine, and they are able to respond very quickly to any kind of wins that we have, try to diminish it in any way they can. I can use it as an example, the victory against the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in a federal court here in San Francisco, in which the judge ruled that fluoridation chemicals, as they are in the concentrations that are currently represented at 0.7 parts per million in American tap water, represents an unreasonable risk to human health. And therefore, the EPA must do its job and regulate these toxic chemicals accordingly, specifically to protect our brain. It was neurotoxicity that the whole case was revolved around. So this is kind of a overall summary, but again, anytime we're talking about fluoridation and hopefully the end of fluoridation, I'm here to talk about it.
No, that's a great background. Thank you, Clint. And I guess one question that comes to mind with that background you gave us is, how are states able to make this determination and keep that law in the case of Utah or Florida, where there's so many other levels of government tyranny where we see, it's a national issue, it's a federal issue, and it doesn't matter what the state decides, the federal government still has the final call. What makes this different from what you've learned about or what you've seen, that states can make this determination, but the federal government at any point hasn't stepped in and overruled it? Like, I'm really curious to know how that dynamic works.
You're talking about the legality, then, I think, of the jurisdictional nature of states over the federal. Is that what you're pointing
Well,
to?
to a degree. I mean, in theory, states always have the right to write their own laws, but there's always the federal government over it. And we've seen many examples of different policies where a state might decide something. I mean, this really wasn't what I had in mind, but let's look at medical marijuana, for example. States can say that they'll decriminalize it, but it's still technically federally illegal. And so that's just one example. But what I'm saying is, I could see a situation, especially with the propaganda machine that you're talking about for fluoride, that one of these states would have a win and the federal government could say, nope, we're snatching that win away. So what prevents that in your mind? Or is it really just come down to state versus federal?
Well, in the 50s, in particular, a lot of court cases were brought up through the local superior courts, and then in some cases, the state supreme courts. California is one of them. And unfortunately, whether the judges were they misunderstood the nature of the beast, which is excusable, I suppose, but fluoridationists have a really great way of confusing things. So, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency is the federal agency that has authority over tap water, and it was given that in the Safe Water Act in the 70s. And so, yes, the EPA can set standards for all kinds of chemicals. There's things put in the water like chloramine or chlorine, and there are other things that are put in water to sanitize the water or to help with the pipes, keep the pipes running, and different chemicals that are put in the water for the sake of just delivery of sanitary water, which is a very different animal to a medicament, something put in the water, not to treat the water, but to treat you. And somehow, it gets confused because, in fact, the courts, a lot of times, just determine that fluoride is a mineral. And yes, it's true. There's a mineral in the Earth's crust called calcium fluoride, and it's there in abundance, and it can find its way into tap water. And so, in the 50s, a lot of judges ruled, well, it's just a mineral additive, and therefore it is under the purview of the EPA. And as long as it's safe, It's okay. But the other big distinction is something called police powers. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with this legal distinction. It's a doctrine in American law that gives authority to cities, states, and counties, and governments to protect you from yourself. It's, in fact, the underlying doctrine for vaccination mandates and vaccination programs. That the state has an obligation to help the overall health of people, and if there's an epidemic, then you got to step in and do something about it. Like we saw with the scamdemic, that whole attitude was clearly leveraged, right? Every bit of authority and draconian measures that were put in place were justified based on this exceptional need to get involved now, to do something about this horrible pandemic that's spreading through our land. And so, yeah, the government has a well-established legal precedence, even going back to 1905 and that case that established vaccination mandates for the first time, Massachusetts versus Jacobson. And so, yeah, the police powers is something that the federal government doesn't have. The Constitution of the United States does not give this kind of authority. In fact, the Bill of Rights protects us from unwarranted invasion. But the states, on the other hand, have a different authority according to the courts, and they can use police powers. So it's funny that even the term, because people think of police, they think, their local police department or whatever. And I try to explain that it's, I guess, if you want to come up with a kind of an analog, if you were on the street and you were getting mugged right at knife point, for example, and a cop saw this happening, to protect you from this mugger and the knife he has, the cop would, let's say, try to run and tackle this assailant, and in the process knock you over. So in trying to protect you, you may have to experience some discomfort or some negative consequences, but in the end, it's better for you. And that's kind of what police powers, in a kind of a metaphor, looks like. And so, yeah, they claim it's for your safety, it's for your own good, and the things like dental fluorosis, which is a discoloration of the enamel. You might see it in mild forms, which is like a lot of people have it. They don't even know what it came from. But you might see like it's very white. Your teeth aren't perfectly white, but this discoloration is actually, it shows like white streaks in your teeth. And in more severe cases, though, it starts to turn yellow. And in the most severe cases, you will see it turn brown and even just start to destroy your enamel. It all happens, by the way, this is a lot of people don't know, it happens when your teeth are forming, when they haven't even protruded from the gums yet. So there's a certain enzyme that gets disrupted when fluorine's present. And when it disrupts that enzyme, it ruins your body's natural ability to create enamel. I think it's just amazing that your body can create enamel at all. And I wouldn't want to mess with it. But drinking tap water at the time when your adult teeth are coming in, interferes with the ability. So your body produces enamel of poor quality. It's called fluorosis, dental fluorosis, particular. Fluorosis is just a generic term for any disease that's caused by fluoride. And fluoride, gets into our bodies obviously through fluoridated tap water, but kids also swallow their fluoridated toothpaste, and that can really contribute to fluorosis. And the pro-fluoridationists will point that out. They'll say, oh, well, you can't say that all the fluorosis that you're seeing comes from tap water fluoride. It's probably the kids are eating their too much toothpaste, and that's a serious problem we all need to talk about as well. But it's voluntary, I guess, at this point for people to buy fluoridated toothpaste and give it to their children. But anyway, so fluorosis is one of the outward signs that you've been exposed to too much fluoride in your youth. And anyway, but your brain you can't see it. It's hard to see. And but it was measured, and that's why we got that federal court ruling, because of the huge abundance of science showing that fluoride chemicals definitely interfere with cognitive function, from IQ and memory, motor coordination too. So I think I've just talked, but there's just so many different angles about fluoridation. When you put it in the water, it's no bueno. So yeah, so the states have this ability to use that's what I was saying about the police powers to force medicate people. But again, in the 50s, a lot of the court cases they reaffirmed the state's police powers, but they also confused it as a natural mineral that stopped us from winning in court too. So this recent trial against the EPA is so interesting, because our lawyer and my good friend Michael Connett of the Fluoride Action Network, he, together with one of our bigger activists, they discovered in federal law an avenue to sue in a way that's never been done before. And it was a really novel approach. So in the Toxic Substance and Control Act, often called TSCA, which was passed in the 70s, it gave the EPA all kinds of powers to regulate toxics in our environment of all kinds. Everything from like dry cleaners. They can't use. There's a chemical they used for years that they can't use anymore. Different industries polluting. So it's broad sweeping legislation that gives the EPA a huge power to regulate pollutants in our environment. And there's a provision in that law that allows for average citizens to petition the EPA to regulate a chemical that they aren't currently regulating. And so we did. We put together a petition with hundreds of pages of science showing clear indication of fluoride's toxicity on the brain. We focus specifically on the neurotoxicity. Even though it affects lots of parts of your brain, we just wanted, because part of the petition is not only the chemical, but what's called the pathway. So, what is the endpoint that you're specifically also petitioning for? So you have to name the chemical and the part of the body that's affected. So because of the abundance of it's like a no-brainer when you read the literature about fluoride's effect on the human brain. It starts in the womb. The placenta does not stop the fluoride. So whatever the mother's drinking, it goes straight into the brain. So when your very first brain cell comes into existence, it's being bathed in fluoride. So it shouldn't be any surprise that it's affecting your cognitive abilities. Indeed, just very roughly, we're talking about 5 IQ points. That if your mother was drinking fluoride all through your pregnancy and you continue to drink fluoride chemicals into your adolescence, there's a measurable difference in your IQ. And yeah, roughly speaking, it's 5 IQ points, it's a huge amount. That is a big number. To understand why that's such a big number, even though it on one level it's a small number, because no parent would really know, or no teacher would be like, this kid's, he should be smarter. You just accept, that's their IQ. It's not noticeable on the individual basis. But if you look at the IQ distribution, which is a bell curve, and you slide that whole bell curve over 5 points to the left, what you do is you double the number of mentally challenged people that fall way below, and you halve the number of geniuses. So that alone explains a lot about our society. I think you can conclude what you want to conclude about that. But yeah, it definitely has a notable, measurable, and distinctive effect on our brain. So we petitioned the EPA, and if the EPA should deny your petition based on scientific justifications, that gives you standing in a federal court to go straight to federal court and sue them. And then the proceedings are not like any other proceeding that you're familiar with either. in the sense that, like in a criminal trial, you might have a jury, or, in a civil trial, you also might have a jury and you have a judge, and, all those kinds of proceedings you might be familiar with. This is entirely different. And by the way, the Fluoride Action Network, as plaintiffs, we were the first to take advantage of, we're not the first to petition the EPA, but the first to actually get to trial. That the EPA in the past with other citizen activists were able to throw out the case before trial began through preliminary procedural matters. So this is the first time it actually went to trial. And what you see in these proceedings is the only arbiter is the judge. He's the sole arbiter. This guy, his name is Judge Chen, right here in San Francisco Federal Court. It was his job to learn everything that you can learn about fluoride as a chemical, fluoridation chemicals of all different kinds, what it does chemically in the body, specifically the brain, and like when you're pregnant, how does it get into the baby's brain? How do you measure it because as you learn when you look into the science of it, a lot of the evidence comes from 3 large cohorts where mothers in the research agreed to have their urine tested, and the fluoride concentrations of urine during pregnancy were correlated later on the offspring, sometimes 2 years later, sometimes 4 years later, sometimes 12 years later. They were able to measure differences in IQ and other cognitive functions that directly correlated to the fluoridation concentration in the mother's urine. But anyway, that's very complicated because, and of course the EPA tried to argue that urine concentrations isn't a proper measure because it doesn't tell you what the actual exposure to the embryo was, or to the fetus, or to the baby who then was bottle fed, perhaps. So there's a lot of complications, and this judge had to learn a lot of variables, and biostatistics is very complicated in general because you're dealing with such a variety of human beings that health, a lot of different things, and so it's all over the map in a way, and you've got to control for all these confounding variables. And anyway, we had a trial. First of all, the lawsuit was filed. We began the lawsuit in 2017. And it wasn't long after that we got through the procedural motions and actually got that trial, like I said, for the first time under the Toxic Substance Control Act. Anybody ever did that? Which meant that it was on. And what happens in these proceedings is that we bring forth our experts and they bring forth their experts, and everyone's under oath. So their testimony is under penalty of perjury, which is a dream come true in itself. We felt victorious even to have gotten that far, because these public agencies will lie and they will misrepresent the safety and effectiveness. They will use language like art of the magic, black magic art of the words, to manipulate and make you to turn something that's bad for you into something that's good for you. So just to have them under oath was a big deal. We have depositions that are so damning. It's amazing. But there we are in court day after day, listening to both their side and ours. And after a couple weeks of intense testimony in the most specific, detailed biological functions and things, I learned so much. Like, for example, I didn't know this, but mothers, during a certain growth period of the baby in their womb, when the bones are forming, need a lot of calcium. And so the mother donates from her bone calcium. So the mother actually loses bone matter during that period to contribute it to the baby's bone development. And if the mother had drunk fluoride and the fluoride got sunk into her bones at 10, 20, 30 years earlier, that bone being reutilized, the fluoride then from her bone gets released as well. So it's on top of the fluoridated water she's drinking. She's also adding the fluoride that she's had historically from her that's been trapped in her bones. So it's very complicated. And then the science, that is the biostatistical science, the judge had to learn all about how different research and different scientific experiments and natural conditions where people have studied fluoride's effect on brains. Some studies are just better than others, right? So you have to have a high standard for good science, and then some other science might be indicative, but it's not as strong. Double-blind randomized study is always the gold standard, but it's hard to accomplish that with fluoride in the water. Anyway, so at the end of the first trial, we were all pretty optimistic that we won, because within this proceedings, our threshold was not to prove 100% that fluoride chemicals at parts per million, 0.7 parts per million, as is represented in concentrations in America's tap water, proves that it harms your brain. Our threshold was simply to prove, and this is in the Toxic Substances Control Act's languaging, our job is to merely get the threshold is merely to prove that it represents an unreasonable risk, which is a lower threshold. And we did win after 7 years and a second trial, but it's very curious about how we ended up having to go through a second trial. After the first trial, as I was saying, we thought we'd won. I mean, it was pretty clear from the evidence that we put forth. Just so happened at the time when the first trial was ending, the National Institutes of Health, the premier federal research agency within Department of Health and Human Services, was actively involved in the largest ever meta-study of fluoride's neurotoxicity. Well, wow. So the judge said, hey, well, given everything and the importance of this decision, let's put this case on hold until that research is published. And indeed, the NIH was taking on quite an ambitious program, and they were indeed looking at every single research ever done on neurotoxicity of fluoride. And it was very complicated, and it was the top scientists that we've got in the federal government were going through all of the studies, and as I was saying, categorizing them, like all the different research. Is it high quality, medium quality, low quality? This is what a meta study is, right? They take all the studies and then they evaluate the studies, and they're looking for what's called a linear correlation. So causation, the difference between causation and correlation, and you get to causation when you see an absolute linear representation in the graphs of the proportion of fluoride to the IQ. If you see a linear relationship between the two, you can assume that it's causal. But it just so happens that yes, when you take all the research combined, when you start getting down to 1.5 parts per million, the relationship between these two factors starts to become fuzzy, and it's not, and it's no surprise, because the smaller and the smaller and smaller the amount you get, it's harder and harder to detect the effect. Doesn't say it's not there, but it's just hard to detect. So anyway, the case was put on hold indefinitely until we were waiting for this publication, and it kept not coming and kept not coming and kept not coming. So once again, our intrepid lead lawyer, Michael Connett, did a Freedom of Information Act request at HHS and found that top leadership was withholding it, that the draft had been completed, the review of the draft had completed, the review of the draft had been completed. They were doing everything they could do to over study this and in the actual conclusion, to language it so it's super precise, and didn't say too much, it didn't say too little. So when it came out that they were actually holding it back, the judge then subpoenaed the draft, and so it became evidence in the case. And so it didn't get published to the public, but it became evidence in our case. restarted a whole new trial. Once again, all of their experts came and all of our experts came, and now we're testifying on this whole new set of information that the NIH has produced as far as their draft. And we won. It was last fall. The judge finally ruled. Took him in. Actually, we finished the case last year, but it took him into this year before he actually ruled. It took months before he ruled, but he finally did rule. And it was coincidental that he ruled just in the week that they decided to publish at least the first part of the NIH's study to the public. And his ruling was very clear that fluoride chemicals at 0.7 parts per million, which is the typical concentration in American tap water, presents an unreasonable risk to human health. That should be it. That should be it. I was telling you that 1.5 parts per million is the point of departure. That means the point at which there is an observable linear connection between fluoride and IQ. Less than 1.5, it starts to become blurry. And so people who put fluoride in the water will say, see, part 7 per million is less than 1.5. So and there's no proof that it harms IQ, right? And therefore we should just keep doing it. But what people don't understand in toxicology and public health policy, you and the EPA, when it comes to all other chemicals, will use a factor of 10. So you take 1.5 parts per million, which is the point of departure, the point at which nobody disagrees that, yes, you will have an effect on your brain. If you're drinking water at 1.5 parts per million on a regular basis, you will have measurable deficiency in your IQ. So what they do is they use a factor of 10 to protect all other people, because you're just going based on the science and the subjects of those particular research. But there's a wide variety of people, as I said in the beginning. People are all over the map when it comes to health, and there's some people who are particularly sensitive to fluoride in particular. Like, it causes all kinds of things in their health, like headaches. And there's this one autistic child whose mother discovered it was fluoride that was causing his outbursts. Any rate, so what we're talking about, if you take 1.5 parts per million and you divide it by 10, it's 0.15. Now, if the EPA set a regulation, you can only fluoridate water of 0.15. It's basically making the fluoridation schemes obsolete. Nobody would do it. And that's what they should do. But just last month, the EPA let the court know that it will be appealing. So now we got to look at another year, however long it takes. We would hope under a new administration, the EPA would not have appealed. And it's interesting because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is vocally against fluoridation, but he's head of HHS, and the EPA is not. The EPA is actually an independent agency, and it's not under any of the cabinet positions. So they just kind of do whatever they want to do, and they're going to spend a lot of money on these high-priced, high-powered lawyers. I mean, I tell you, they brought forth their lawyers were amazing. They didn't miss a beat. They had an army of them working on this. And so they're willing to spend a lot of money and try to keep fluoridation flowing in your tap water. So there you have it. So that's where we are with the current situation. Any questions?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Jake. It's been burning in my mind as Clint has been giving us this history, and I'm going to jump in there. I don't think you've got a word in edgewise this whole episode, but not to put you on the spot too much, Clint, and you've been very by the book and factual, so you can pass on this question and let Jake and I do it. I'm going to be the guy opening the rabbit hole here, but
I know what the question is probably already.
Okay, but well, I've got to ask it because that's who I am. So, beyond just the profit motive, from your perspective, what else is involved in this constant push to be fluorinating the water? I mean, if you think about even at 0.7 or even at 0.015 or whatever it is, it's still poison, it's still toxic, and people drink a lot of water every day. So it doesn't matter, as you said earlier, a little bit of arsenic or, a little bit of some other toxic chemical, it's still toxic and it's still bad for you. So, I think about it's been proven that there's such a thing as voice to skull technology, like that you can research it, and many have, like that's a real thing. I look at my hometown where there was these experiments on, well, I say hometown where I'm from originally in St. Louis. There was the Pruitt Igo
Mm-hmm.
apartments where all this experimentation was going on people who were disadvantaged in these slummy apartments. There's the spring that happened in the 60s in San Francisco, LSD experiments. I mean, you name it. The government is known for experimenting on people. And that really kind of begs the question, if it's not profit, then what is it? And I just love to get your perspective on, especially someone who's been in the front lines. What else is going on here from your perspective?
Okay, good. So I'm speaking for myself, and I was red pilled, as people like to say nowadays, in the 80s. So I've been seeing things. Fluoridation was something I learned about. I was like, of course, another one. Millions of examples. It happened in St. Louis, at Tuskegee experiments, just weather modification, just all these different experiments on human population without their permission or even their knowledge. That is well documented, and we don't have to have any controversy there. I am personally willing to go very far with my theories, my conspiracy theories. I did write a book called Something in the Water: 12 Steps to Ending Fluoridation in Your Town, which the result of 4 years of teleconferences that I hosted from 2016 to about 2020, every month for 2 years, 2 hours of solid testimony from doctors and dentists and lawyers and activists all over the world, and people who are chemically sensitive, as I told you, to people, even people who raise horses. Horses are particularly sensitive to fluoridation chemicals, to water workers and preachers, and just a whole swath of people. Anyway, I took all of that amazing testimony and I put it to this book, and it's online on Amazon, and you can use this to mount and proceed in a campaign in your local area to stop water fluoridation. And in the very first step, which is confronting the conspiracy, confronting this evil, it's the very first step for everybody. You have to have some context for yourself, like why. You're asking me why, and that is it's not going to go away, that question. And as I'm saying that, I do want to caution people that if you do seek to be involved actively in creating a campaign, participating in a campaign to end water fluoridation locally, is where it's always done, or at state level perhaps, you want to be cautious about what you say, about how much speculation you do, because it's very much a question that people have on their minds. It's impossible to avoid. If you're telling me it's not good for me, then you tell me then why. And people are willing to hear nefarious motivations, but they still want you to tell them why. And as I said earlier, one of the more conservative answers to that question is that for people who produce this stuff as a waste product, profit from not having to have to neutralize it. But I'm willing to go way more nefarious myself personally. It's just, again, the caution is if you're actively campaigning, you want to try to direct people's attention away from that question. You want to say, okay, I'm not sure. You can say, I'm not sure why, or there's a lot of different opinions about why. As long as you accept that it's not good to have in the water, will you join me in this campaign to end it? And so, yeah, on any campaign, you're actually going to find quite a variety of people. Some people are the most conservative. Why, apart from the profit motive, is also just that these health agencies, like the Department of Health and Human Services, the CDC, as you know, they have this credibility. It's unwarranted, and because of the scamdemic, it's under question more so than ever, thankfully. But really, their worth is predicated on their believability, that people have confidence in their pronouncements. People don't want to have to study every single chemical and determine for themselves. They want to be able to rely on a trustworthy agency, and that's what they were created for in the first place. So their credibility is at stake. If they've been promoting and doubling down and tripling down every single time some new evidence comes out about about dental fluorosis or just any kind of neurobiological processes to get interfered with, you'd think that would be enough for them to stop it. But no, they keep doubling down and tripling down, and they kind of have to at this point, because now if they admit to having been wrong all these years, and so forcefully wrong, that's going to eat away at their credibility. And so many people believe that the fluoridation is actually, they would have sacrificed fluoridation a long time ago, except for this, because they need to have the credibility for what? The vaccines. That the vaccine, once again, is the ultimate program to get under your skin, with mRNA technology to get into your DNA. I mean, they want the vaccine to be widely trusted based on their pronouncements that it's safe and effective. And so if they admit they're wrong about fluoride, then people start, well, if you're wrong about fluoride and you were so positive before, what about all the other things you say are safe and effective? So that's another reason. But I'll go as far as to say that, yes, they are intentionally harming us. After witnessing the absolute uniformity of, again, government, media, academia, corporations, professional organizations such as the AMA, the American Pediatrics Association, the American Dental Association, all of them on the exact same script, saying the exact same things. Always. Wikipedia, just read Wikipedia. You'll know it's lies, right? And I've seen it for so long, so consistently, and with so much evidence, so much obvious evidence. You don't want to put fluorine in your body ever, at all. I have to conclude that they want to harm us. Now, again, that's still like, okay, well, in what ways do they harm us, and why do they want to harm us? Still a question is still there. Some people talked about the effect on the pituitary gland in particular. So it does calcify the pituitary gland. You go online right now, you can see images of a nice, fresh, yummy, juicy pituitary gland and one that's all junked up with fluoride, and it's a big difference. Now, the pituitary gland, just like everyone recognizes, it has very important functions. Melatonin, for example, which helps regulate sleep and things like that. But I have come to believe that pituitary gland might have even greater effects. Like I think it's our antenna that keeps us all spiritually connected in the great collective conscience, something like that. And so I believe that it's part of isolating us and alienating us from each other on a cosmic level. That's just, I'm going there. I'm willing to entertain that as part of it. But even short of that, when fluorine gets put into your body, it affects your bones, it affects your joints, it affects your endocrine system a lot. Again, your teeth, of course, your brain, all your brain, not just your pituitary gland. It's very sensitive. So what we're looking at is slow poisoning. And for the medical industry, of course, that we know a lot of public policy is bad public policy, and the ultimate result is profit by the medical industry. They seem to have more money than God these days. They're building hospitals here in San Francisco, like in anticipation of what, I don't know. It's expensive to build these massive hospitals, but there's a lot of ailments that when you take slow poison every day that affects every part of your body, you're going to have all these unusual ailments. And again, people's lifestyles aren't that great, so they have diabetes or what have you. It's contributory too. So it amplifies some of these other diseases that would maybe be more organic or have other causes, right? So because of that, it's a hidden poison that, yes, indeed, is killing people. So it shortens our lifespans, but it increases the medical costs because you're dealing with all of these things. Hip fractures, I'm sure we would have, I don't know, I haven't done a full study, but I'm just guessing, 10% of what we have now in terms of hip fractures. based on what fluoride does to a body over 60, 70, 80 years. Well, actually, it's 70 years now. The CDC a few years ago celebrated 70 years since fluoridation began. So it's been decades, and many people, have been raised on fluoride, and they're experiencing medical problems. So those are my reasons. I have you got any other? Because someone's got to explain this. It's crazy how invested the fluoridationists are, and they literally have on their payroll paid shills. There's this thing called the Fluoride. What is it called again? I forget. Fluoride Society, Fluoride Advocacy Society, or something like that. Just a way to funnel money through NGOs and stuff to pay a few mouthpieces around the world, and they're always there. They're like online. All of our activists are online. There they are, causing trouble, being trolls. It's just saying the same upside down language, questioning everything, making it personal too, so people waste their energy in like fighting these guys. And they show up at like public comment whenever a city is trying to like talk about it publicly with their people. Anyway, we've got quite the job in front of us, and I do invite everybody, if you're thinking about taking on a project like I did in 2011, where you're like, I want to make a difference in the world, and there's a lot of things to focus on, there's a lot of injustices, a lot of things to fix, and maybe you want to focus on one thing, you want to pick one thing and go deep with it. That was what I did. Fluoridation is a very worthwhile endeavor. The impact is immeasurable in terms of our health. And all we're asking is that they stop adding it. Like in the end, all that needs to be done is a mouse click at the Public Utilities Department to stop adding it. You don't have to re-engineer the whole water systems or what have you. It's just stop adding it. And that's all we ask for, which is a big ask apparently. So join us in the worldwide campaign to end water fluoridation. Again, you can read my book, which will give you everything you need to know to get started and continue to a successful campaign. It's called Something in the Water, 12 Steps to Ending Water Fluoridation in Your Town. I would also recommend Fluoride Action Network's website, which is at fluoridealert.org. And it's a wonderful repository of news and science and politics, all related to fluoridation. So you've got that going for you. You don't have to, people say, show me the research. Well, it's all there. And then if you want to understand the ultimate conspiracy behind it, there's a singular book called The Fluoride Deception by Christopher Bryson that is an excellent read. It should be made into a movie, but it goes back to the very early inception of the idea of putting fluoride in the water for dental health. And it was foisted upon us by the aluminum industry, who was using fluoride to reduce the temperature of the smelting process, saving them lots of money, but at the same time causing ailments in the people who worked at these smelting plants that they didn't take long for them to figure out what it was, but they started trying to rig some kind of situation. So, and then if you want to study fluoride's deleterious effects on the body, there's The Case Against Fluoride by Dr. Paul Conant. That's a tome that just covers, there are a couple of them, but that's the most recent one that covers like every part of the body and what fluoride does to your body. So if you want to learn about the biological problems of ingesting fluoridation, it's The Case Against Fluoride by Dr. Conant, Paul Conant. And then and a lot of people they want to know the history of the conspiracy and how it got started and how the federal government won collusion with corporations. Yes. That's The Fluoride Deception by Christopher Bryson.
Well, we really appreciate everything that you've been doing to push back against fluoride in water. And we've been really just in our recent broadcasts talking about walking the talk. And, it's one thing to understand everything that's going on in the world, and it's another thing to actually take your first foot forward and do something about it. And like I said, you've been there on the front lines, you've been there pushing back against the agenda. So I know I speak for a lot of people watching that we thank you for your efforts and the resources that people can do it themselves, because someone has to take the baton and move it forward. So yeah, there's so much more that I know we could discuss on this topic. We could go another hour, but I think our viewers will appreciate us wrapping up this particular episode. But Clint, it's been great. You provided a wealth of information, and we'd love to have you on sometime again in the future.
Well, thanks again. Let's keep talking about it. Let's not let it go into the void. It's keep it front and center.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. And to everyone, please go check out those resources that Clint had mentioned. Look at the Fluoride Action website and get educated there. I think it's really important, the point that you brought up about show me the evidence, show me the science. Clearly, you have a one-stop resource for all that. Yeah, so I think with anything, the more educated you are, the better conversations you have, and the more that you can raise awareness. So thanks again for all of that.
You're welcome. God bless you.
And you as well. And to our audience, we'll see you next week.
What's he building in there? What's he building in there? We have a right to know.